Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to do session 17, and I will start out with apologizing for how long it took me to get session 16 out. It was a long session, and it was just one of those periods of time where all of the catalysts decided to come rushing in all at once and had to be dealt with. And I'm sure most of you who are listening, who are studying the material at this level, know what that means, because we're kind of on the path of accelerating our evolution of consciousness. So that happens from time to time. A lot of things just kind of build up, and it wouldn't really work if we didn't feel overwhelmed sometimes. So I appreciate your patience, and hopefully that isn't my new pace. Hopefully I can retain a better pace like I was before, because I do enjoy doing these. I was just overwhelmed for that period of time. So anyway, thank you again, and let's get started with session 17. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. Before we communicate by answer, we shall correct an error which we have discovered in the transmission of our information to you. We have difficulty dealing with your time-space. There may again be errors of this type. Feel free to question us that we may recalculate in your time-space measurements. The error we have discovered concerns one of the arrivals of both the Orion group into your planetary sphere of influence and the corresponding arrival of emissaries of the Confederation. We gave dates of 2600 years for the Orion entry, 2300 for Confederation entry. This is incorrect. The recalculation indicates numbers 3600 for Orion entry, 3300 for Confederation entry. We communicate now. So I did correct the dates when I read it the last time, because I'm reading this on lawof1.info. It has footnotes, especially correcting the errors that Ra corrected and referencing points that Ra references later. So Ra originally said 2600 and 2300, but they meant 3600 and 3300 years ago. Those events happened. And again, they, for some reason, have trouble with our time space. So they were able to fix it, and I think it's always good to take pretty much any numbers that Ra says with a grain of salt, but it's interesting because the book 5 stuff for this session, Dawn gets a little bit off track again sometimes. So there were some questions and answers that were removed from this session, and Carla's commentary is this. She says, Dawn was a scientist, and he never could quite accept that Ra was in no position to chat with us about phenomena that could be measured. So I think that's an interesting thing, that Dawn was definitely wanting like historical information and measurements, percentiles, these kinds of things. And Ra, did say that they wanted to transmit philosophical information and not historical information. So it is just an interesting part of the contact that measurements of time and whatever are not for sure accurate. I think we can assume this time period that Ra came through, without being questioned to correct these numbers. I'm going to guess those numbers are correct. And again, it lines up with 3,600 years ago was about the time of Moses and the Hebrews fleeing Egypt, and that's when Yahweh came and contacted Moses. This is a pretty definitive event that Ra explicitly gives to us in the timeline of Confederation and Orion influencing us. So, but otherwise, yeah, there are times when Ra has trouble with that, and in the future too, there are times when Ra has trouble with the energy body, with energy centers, and sometimes they'll refer to the green ray as the third ray, because they don't actually count the first ray. So, yeah, numbers are tough for Ra. But now getting started with the actual session, 17.1, Dawn says, Thank you very much. I wish to say again, I consider it an honor, a great honor, and also a privilege as the rest of the sentence is inaudible. And I would like to reiterate that my questions may sometimes go a little off because I keep going on something that I had already started to work into the applications of the law of one to better understand primarily the free will principle and further distortions that we discover. I got 3 questions just now in meditation. I'll ask them before we continue. First, we are now in the 4th density. Will the effects of the 4th density increase over the next 30 years? Will we see more changes in our environment and our effect upon our environment? I am Ra. The fourth density is a vibrational spectrum. Your time-space continuum has spiraled your planetary sphere and your, what we would call galaxy, what you call star, into this vibration. This will cause the planetary sphere itself to electromagnetically realign its vortices of reception of the instreaming of cosmic forces expressing themselves as vibrational webs, so that the Earth will thus be fourth density magnetized, as you might call it. This is going to occur with some inconvenience, as we have said before, due to the energies of the thought forms of your peoples, which disturb the orderly constructs of energy patterns within your Earth spirals of energy, which increases entropy and unusable heat. This will cause your planetary sphere to have some ruptures in its outer garment, while making itself appropriately magnetized for fourth density. This is the planetary adjustment. You will find a sharp increase in the number of people, as you call mind-body-spirit complexes, whose vibrational potentials include the potential for fourth vibrational distortions. Thus, there will seem to be, shall we say, a new breed. These are those incarnating for fourth density work. There will also be a sharp increase in the short run of negatively oriented or polarized mind-body-spirit complexes and social complexes, due to the polarizing conditions of the sharp delineation between fourth density characteristics and third density self-service orientation. Those who remain in fourth density upon this plane will be of the so-called positive orientation. Many will come from elsewhere, for it would appear that with all of the best efforts of the Confederation, which includes those from your people's inner planes, inner civilizations, and those from other dimensions, the harvest will still be much less than that which this planetary sphere is capable of comfortably supporting in service. So I think this is a pretty big answer from Ra. It's one that I've quoted many times in many different conversations, because there are a lot of things that Ra's talking about that are very applicable to our current point in time-space, where we are right now, going through the transition. Dawn did ask about a 30-year time period. Obviously, we've entered into the 45 years since this session, 44 years since, almost 45 years since this session was transmitted. So, essentially here, the things that Ra is saying in this question, or in this answer, this response to Dawn, is that, again, the first thing they say, the fourth density is a vibrational spectrum. We are just on the very beginning of the cusp of the entrance into fourth density, and that there's a little bit of overlap with the end of the third density vibrational spectrum. And part of that is exacerbated by the relatively unique conditions of our own planetary sphere, where we do have such distorted thought forms that we all engage with every single day. All of us are still engaging with third density thought forms. I really doubt that there's anyone who's really purely fourth density yet, because that it's still such a big part of the planetary web. It's still a part of the energy that the Earth sphere itself is processing. And then we get the choice of how to react to that, but it's a very overwhelming energy that we have to process in some way. And so really the Earth itself is reacting to this difficulty in this transition, where there is a lot of entropy and unusable heat, that Ra says. So, we can argue about whether or not climate change is man-made, or whether it's just a part of this transition. I think it's both. I think that's what Ra's saying here. We wouldn't have this unusable heat if it wasn't for the difficult, negative service to self thought forms that our peoples were still engaging with, a lot of times unconsciously. So we are doing things that are objectively harmful to the planet in pursuit of service to self, and that those types of things like extensive deforestation, extensive burning of fossil fuels, these types of things that are really destructive to the surface of the Earth and to our atmosphere, are creating that kind of feedback loop to making a lot of unusable heat. Obviously, there's a lot of climate change. It is November 4th. I just went on a hike. I live in Colorado at like 6,500 feet elevation. I saw butterflies and grasshoppers and freshly growing green grass in the first week of November. It's a little eerie seeing butterflies on flowers, on what are usually spring flowers that are blooming in the foothills here of the Rocky Mountains. So this is just, according to Rob, part of the process because of the disharmony, because of the incongruency of these negative thought forms and the Earth wanting to transition into fourth density. The Earth is ready, our star is ready, everything's ready. Their vibrations are upshifting into the fourth density. And individually and collectively we could too. But individually we're making the choice to follow that upshift. Collectively we aren't succeeding so much just because here, as Ra does say, there aren't that many people to harvest. There are more positive people to harvest than negative people, so we are going into fourth density positive, but overall, most people are still asleep and in the sinkhole of indifference. Most people are very close, because everyone who's incarnated right now has incarnated because they are close enough that they could reach harvest in this lifetime, but many won't. Most won't. And so those thought forms, those confused thought forms of all of the unharvestable are keeping the planet kind of locked in this transition period and creating a lot of catalysts, not just for the planet, but for the people who are living on the planet. And again, just giving more opportunities for people to choose service to others. When there is ruptures in the outer garment of the planet, and these catastrophic climate change events, there are opportunities then to serve others through the suffering that others are experiencing from these difficulties. So that's one part of what's going on with our planetary transition. Ross says that we will have a new breed, and we talk about this more later, about the dual activated entities who have started to incarnate right before Ra does this communication as of, I want to say maybe it's like the 30s, somewhere in the 30s. Ra starts talking about dual activated entities and says that there are about 35,000 of them who have incarnated at that time. Obviously, we can assume in the past 45 years that number has been growing, probably exponentially, and more of the beings who have been incarnating onto this planet are dual activated for early fourth density beings who have just been harvested, whether on this planet or another planet, and are beginning their fourth density experience and have incarnated kind of early because they wanted to serve, because they wanted to help Earth, and because Earth isn't going to have enough beings to populate it in fourth density with just our own native population. So we have this new breed who have started to incarnate. I would assume that just about everybody who is incarnating right now is dual activated. I do leave some room because I think it's possible, because the transition, we probably have a few hundred more years before we can truly say that we're really getting into fourth density. I do think that it's possible that there are still maybe third density beings who are incarnating into maybe one more lifetime with the hope of potentially being able to harvest in this lifetime, in this next lifetime, in this transition period. Because, again, it's seniority of vibration. Right now, everybody who's incarnated is seniority of vibration, but I think if you probably filter it down, you can get to an even smaller amount of people who could be given another chance. And it seems like we still have plenty of third density catalyst remaining for a period of time. So most beings, if you're, let's say, under 20 years old, I would say, and you really resonate with this material and you feel sort of incompatible with Earth and you feel like maybe your veil's a little thinner than everyone else around you, it's possible that you are a dual activated entity who has come to assist the Earth. And again, these are very, very, very early fourth density entities. But the consequence of that is, here Ross says, there will also be a sharp increase in the short run of negatively oriented or polarized mind-body-spirit complexes and social complexes, due to the polarizing conditions of the sharp delineation between fourth density characteristics and third density self-service orientation. So we have all these new, and this is part of why I think that we might still have third density beings incarnating, and maybe those who are close to service to self harvest might still be incarnating, because we still have all of these third density thought forms and social structures to take advantage of. And now we also have newly fourth density beings incarnating on Earth who are obviously in the core of their being have already made the choice and are distorted towards service to others and compassion and generosity. And that is just a very ripe situation for service to self entities to take advantage of all of these very new, naive, still partially veiled fourth density beings that they can then manipulate and control. So in the short run, we're still experiencing this, an increase in negatively oriented mind-body-spirit complexes and social complexes. So more and more, like as we speak, again here, November 4th, 2025 is when I'm recording this, there are millions of people who have had their access to food taken away from them with the reduction, with the elimination, the temporary elimination of SNAP benefits. And that wouldn't be happening if the people in power weren't trying to maximize their service to self-polarity. Like that choice wouldn't be made. When Ross says that you can see the people, look at the people in power and see their fruits and recognize the distortions of service to self, I think that's a really obvious one. Like taking away people's access to food is like bare minimum. Like allowing people access to food is like bare minimum pro-social behavior, right? And if you can then have the opportunity to take away people's access to food, well, that's a big boon for your negative polarity, right? So unfortunately, we're seeing this. Hopefully, this short run is short, is short and not, going to be for a few more centuries. I hope not. Again, that really depends on everybody making the choice to upshift with the planet and our sun into fourth density and to try to make choices that align with living in fourth density. And the more you do that, the more you help manifest this vibration. Because as Ross says, it's just what happens is the planet is already vibrating at fourth density. But all of the people using their free will on the planet are holding that vibration back from its full expression. So on an individual level, if you're able to access those fourth density energies and engage with them, you're just going to help manifest fourth density more and more, even if it's just in your own little bubble, in your own little microcosm. But really, all of it helps all of it, because there isn't just your own little bubble, right? You are everything. We are all everything. So that's why our free will is kind of competing. These vibrations are kind of battling back and forth, these third density vibrations and these fourth density vibrations. So I think this is a really good answer from Ra. I think there's a lot of things to think about and talk about with this response from Ra. I think I hit on most of it, although I do want to emphasize that the planetary sphere is realigning its vortices of reception of the instreaming of cosmic forces expressing themselves as vibrational webs. So this is happening automatically. The time has come. It's time for fourth density. And so we can go as fast or as slow as we want into that entry into fourth density. And that's really kind of like the magic of being incarnated right now. The choice is so important. It carries so much weight every time you decide to make the choice. So we will go ahead and move on. We're 20 minutes in. We've done one session, so I'm not ever trying to speed it up. I'm never going to be like, oh, I got to speed it up. I'm going to just talk about as much as possible. But I feel like I have said enough about that first one probably. Yeah, I'm not. This isn't a race. I just want to talk about everything as much as possible. Share all my thoughts, and I probably could talk about this one more, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. So, 17.2, Dawn asks, is it possible to help an entity to reach fourth density level in these last days? I am Ra. It is impossible to help another being directly. It is only possible to make catalyst available in whatever form, the most important being the radiation of realization of oneness with the Creator from the Self, less important being information such as we share with you. We ourselves do not feel an urgency for this information to be widely disseminated. It is enough that we have made it available to 3, 4, or 5. This is extremely ample reward, for if one of these obtains fourth density understanding due to this catalyst, then we shall have fulfilled the law of one in the distortion of service. We encourage a dispassionate attempt to share information without concern for numbers or quick growth among others. That you attempt to make this information available is, in your term, your service. The attempt, if it reaches one, reaches all. We cannot offer shortcuts to enlightenment. Enlightenment is of the moment, is an opening to intelligent infinity. It can only be accomplished by the self for the self. Another self cannot teach, learn enlightenment, but can only teach, learn information, inspiration, or a sharing of love, of mystery, of the unknown that makes the other self reach out and begin the seeking process that ends in a moment. But who can know when an entity will open the gate to the present? So again, another pretty juicy answer from Ra. Here, Ra is explaining that you cannot enlighten somebody else. Okay, you can't do anything to directly help people in that way. All you can do is maintain a vibration where you're radiating your awareness of oneness, because that vibration itself is influential in a subconscious way that might motivate somebody else to then do their own seeking, to be like, oh, what has he got? What has he got in this pocket that's making him so happy, right? Like, what can I maybe do differently that's more like what this person is doing? And really to just be inspirational in that way. Here Ra even says that even just the radiation of yourself in an honest way, while you recognize oneness with the Creator, is far more important than this information, this metaphysical, philosophical information that Ra's teaching. Yes, it's very helpful to a lot of us. It helps us, give us context for what we're trying to do once we realize what we're trying to do. But in general, like most of the third density beings who are trying to make harvest, this doesn't matter to them. This is nothing. I've said it before. I'm really pretty sure that these books are for wanderers, for people who have already traversed the path through sixth density and need to, quote unquote, penetrate the forgetting. And then once we penetrate the forgetting and we come back to a realization of oneness, then we have to work out our own inner vibrations in a way that we can maintain that connection to oneness that we have remembered through our human forms, through our bodily incarnations, and so that we can then help other third density beings recognize that oneness and see that link to the Creator that we all have, that exists within all of us, but has been obscured by the veil. So even me with this and all the other stuff that I've created to try to help people, try to help seekers, Ross says, we encourage a dispassionate attempt to share information without concern for numbers or quick growth among others. That you attempt to make this information available is, in your term, your service. The attempt, if it reaches one, reaches all. I really feel that very strongly. Like I feel like I have like 123 YouTube subscribers, which is honestly really amazing for what I'm doing and how little I've even shared what I'm doing. I know that I have a really firm belief of, if you build it, they will come. That if you put it out there, those who are going to really use it and utilize it and integrate it into their lives in a useful way will be led there on their own. And so I really do have faith in a lot of that. And for those of you who are listening and trying to integrate these teachings on a deeper level and trying to radiate a realization of oneness in your daily lives to help those who haven't found that yet in a passive way, like, thank you. Like, that's awesome. It's really super duper cool. And now this will be on the internet forever, at least until YouTube or Spotify or whoever, if they decide to axe me, who knows. But as it stands now, these exist, and over a long period of time, more and more people will find them and That's really, really cool. And I don't want to be distracted at all by counting those numbers and seeing my success increase as the numbers increase. Because again, Ross says, if you can reach one, then you've reached all. And I do believe that. I do genuinely believe that. So thank you all out there, for whoever's listening, for taking this as seriously as I do, for being really serious about trying to understand how to be the best version of ourselves, to be healers, right? Because that's really what we're doing. Healing is such a big term, but just trying to heal, again, what we were talking about before, the negative social complex thought forms that still exist in our society that are holding back our transition into fourth density. The more people out there who realize oneness, who realize the need to do that fourth density work, the more quickly we move into the fourth density vibrational spectrum. So every one is important. So next one is 17.3. Dawn says, in meditation a few nights ago, I had the impression of a question about a crater in Russia. I believe it was in Tunguska. Can you tell me what caused the crater? I am Ra. The destruction of a fission reactor caused this crater. Questioner. Whose reactor? I am Ra. This is what you may call a drone sent by Confederation which malfunctioned. It was moved to an area where its destruction would not cause infringement upon the will of mind-body-spirit complexes. It was then detonated. Questioner. What was its purpose in coming here? And Ra says, it was a drone designed to listen to the various signals of your peoples. You were at that time beginning work in a more technical sphere. We were interested in determining the extent and the rapidity of your advances. This drone was powered by a simple fission motor or engine, as you would call it. It was not that type which you now know, but was very small. However, it has the same destructive effect upon third-density molecular structures. Thus, as it malfunctioned, we felt it was best to pick a place for its destruction rather than attempt to retrieve it, for the possibility/probability modes of this maneuver looked very, very minute. And I'll just go ahead and read the next two, and then we'll comment on this whole event. 17.6, Dawn asks, was its danger both blast and radiation? I am Ra. There is very little radiation, as you know of it, in this particular type of device. There is radiation which is localized, but the localization is such that it does not drift with the winds as does the emission of your somewhat primitive weapons. Questioner. I believe that an analysis of the trees in that area has shown a low radiation level. Is this the reason for such a low radiation level in the trees? I am Ra. This is correct. The amount of radiation is very localized. However, the energy which is released is powerful enough to cause difficulties. So, here Dawn had in meditation before every Raw session they did meditation together to help tune themselves to prepare. And Dawn would get questions during meditation. So those were his 3 questions. This is his 3rd question. It was about the Tunguska crater. And I think most people are probably somewhat familiar. I'm sort of familiar with the Tunguska event. Basically, there's a huge blast zone in remote Siberia where all the trees were leveled and horizontal, and nobody's ever really been able to figure out what happened. And a lot of speculation was that it was some sort of extraterrestrial device, but that has always been dismissed because of the lack of physical evidence of any sort of device having gone off, no pieces, no fragments of whatever blew up, and it was likely not fully physical, whatever detonated. It's really hard to know how technology works in the upper densities, but essentially they had some sort of technological device. The Confederation was using it to gain information about humans, and it began to malfunction, and so they had to take it somewhere as remote as possible and allow it to detonate, or detonate it, did they say? It was then detonated, so they deliberately detonated it while it was malfunctioning in a remote location so that no people would be harmed by this nuclear blast, essentially. And they were using this to listen to us, to gauge our technological advancement, to see where we were, and yeah, then they did this. It's one of the many things that the Confederation has done that has left their mark on our planet, this in a very, very literal way. But again, Ross says that it wasn't like our primitive weapons. The nuclear blast, the radiation was very localized, but it would still have harmed anyone within that local area when it went off. But there's no drift of the radiation harming anyone, like, downwind of the blast. So that's the Tunguska event. That's what happened. So we're going to go now to this next question. It's 17.8. Don asks, then was the Confederation responsible for Earth receiving nuclear power? I am Ra. It is a point which one cannot judge. What is cause? The basic equation which preceded this work was an equation brought through by a wanderer dedicated to service to the planet. That this work should have become foundation for instruments of destruction was not intended and was not given. So, this is about as defensive as Ra gets. Ra's very defensive in this answer. They're very touchy about this subject. As we hear in 17.9, Don asks, can you tell me who that wanderer was that brought through the equation? I am Ra. This information seems harmless as this entity is no longer of your planetary third density. This entity was named Sound Vibration Complex Albert. So that's Albert Einstein. And yeah, he was a wanderer. The Confederation helped give him this equation, and then it was turned into destructive weapons. The Confederation obviously did not give Einstein this equation to turn it into weapons, and obviously that wasn't Einstein's desire for the information that he discovered and gave to the rest of us. But that is what happened. So Ra says that we cannot judge. I think we can judge. Maybe Ra meant that we shouldn't judge, or they don't want us to judge. I think objectively it's just one of the examples of things that the Confederation tried to do to, in theory, help us that actually ended up causing more harm than good. And that's really unfortunate. It's really a bummer, it's really sad. And I'm sure frustrating. But then the conclusion is that we wouldn't have nuclear weapons if the Confederation hadn't given us this technology, this equation. So, yeah, I just think it's really interesting how touchy Ra is in response to Dawn asking that question in the way that Dawn did ask it. And I guess, that's their right. But I guess we shouldn't really judge too harshly. They aren't, obviously they're trying their best. Obviously they wanted to help us. And obviously there are no mistakes. But I wonder if there isn't a small part of them in somewhere deep down in their being that wishes they hadn't done that. It almost seems like that is the case based on Ra's response here. So we're going to move on from that for the time being. In 1710, Don says, thank you. Can you tell me who, before incarnation into this density, was the one known as Jesus of Nazareth? I am Ra. I have difficulty with this question as it is phrased. Can you discover another form for this query? Questioner, yes. What I meant to say was, can you tell me if Jesus of Nazareth came from the Confederation before incarnation here? I am Ra. The one known to you as Jesus of Nazareth did not have a name. This entity was a member of fourth density of the highest level of that suboctave. This entity was desirous of entering this planetary sphere in order to share the love vibration in as pure a manner as possible. Thus, this entity received permission to perform this mission. This entity was then a wanderer of no name, of Confederation origins, of fourth density, representing the fourth density understanding of the vibration of understanding or love. So, I read that with the corrections in place. Every time I said fourth density there, Ra actually said fifth. So again, another example of them misnumbering and not catching it right away. 17.12, Don says, did you say the fifth vibration was that of love? Fifth density was that of love? I am Ra. I have made an error. The fourth density being is that which we intended to say the highest level of fourth density going into fifth. This entity could have gone on to the fifth, but chose instead to return to third for this particular mission. This entity was of the highest sub-octave of the vibration of love. This is fourth density. So, Jesus was a wanderer from late fourth density. The social memory complex that Jesus came from was just about ready to be harvested into fifth density, but decided while they were just in the most purest expression of love and service to send a wanderer to try to ground that into our collective, to try to teach these lessons of total compassion, total surrender, and even, obviously, martyrdom to our peoples. And we can argue about the efficacy of martyrdom, but at another point, Rod does say that it is the salvation of third density. Like, we are third moving into fourth. Martyrdom is bereft of wisdom. That's kind of the whole point. It's completely bereft of wisdom. But that really pure, selfless love has been an inspiration on so many times. There are many martyrs who have inspired people to serve others and to help people make the choice and move into fourth density for themselves. So while there are obviously distortions, we see them acutely in Carla, and we discuss these because Carla obviously was very much saw Jesus as a role model and was inspired by Jesus's martyrdom to be of total service to others as much as she could possibly muster. I still think overall, I'm not going to say bad things about martyrdom. I'm not going to say bad things about martyrs. And Rod does say that a martyr is actually somebody who does give up their life. It's not just serving a little too much with a lack of wisdom that makes you a martyr. It's doing that so much that you get to the point where your life is on the line for your service. But that's what Jesus did. If we look at Jesus' teachings out of the context of the rest of the Bible, which I think is the best way to look at Jesus' teachings, honestly, Jesus taught to turn the other cheek. Jesus taught nonviolence. Jesus taught generosity. Jesus taught give everything you have away to those who don't have anything, and that's how you'll be as rich as possible, which Rod does also agree, or mention this at another point, that, being totally detached from possessions is a type of freedom that is beyond the grasp of most of us. But Jesus did inspire a lot of people in a lot of ways. And obviously there are a lot of people who call themselves Christian who don't even really have any concept of what Jesus teaches or taught. And there's even a form of modern Christianity that claims that Jesus was too soft, that if Jesus lived today, he'd be harder, and these kinds of... And we now know, too, that Jesus' teachings were attached to Yahweh's teachings through the Bible, the imposter Yahweh. So a lot of bad things have been done in the name of Jesus at this point in time. But it's not actually because of anything that Jesus in particular said or did, at least that we know of in the recorded history of what Jesus said and did. He really did just want to teach compassion and generosity and nonviolence and love. So next we have 17.13, and Dawn asks, when I am communicating with you as Ra, are you at times an individualized entity, or am I speaking to the entire complex? I am Ra. You speak with Ra. There is no separation. You would call it a social memory complex, thus indicating manyness. To our understanding, you are speaking to an individualized portion of consciousness. So, obviously Dawn is prompted to ask this question because of the mistakes that Ra just made in transmission and the mistakes that they corrected at the very beginning of this transmission. So now Dawn is thinking, is it just random portions of Ra that's communicating to us? And sometimes they get things wrong because they aren't connected to the whole of Ra. But Ra is Ra. All of the beings of the social memory complex make up one individualized portion of consciousness. So in 1714, Dawn asks, Do I always speak to the same individualized portion of consciousness in each of the sessions? I am Ra. You speak to the same entity through a channel or instrument. This instrument is at times lower in vital energy. This will sometimes hamper our proceedings. However, this instrument has a great deal of faithfulness to the task and gives whatever it has to this task. Therefore, we may continue even when energy is low. This is why we usually speak to the ending of the session due to our estimation of the instrument's levels of vital energy. So here Ra is basically saying that at times when the communication seems garbled, errors are happening, it's because Carla is low in vital energy. She has dips in vital energy. And there's a point when she was on her LSD that there were some errors in transmission because of and this might be the one that they're even talking about, when the LSD began to wear off. This cut off her supply of vital energy, and Ra had to readjust, and some of the things came through garbled. And there are times in future sessions where Carla has pain flares because she has rheumatoid arthritis, and laying completely motionless for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, however long the Ra session takes, is really, really hard on her body. And so sometimes she'll have a very sharp pain flare, most likely in one of her joints, I would guess. And these things can also garble the transmission. But they do say that Carla is very faithful to this endeavor. So they're able to then take a little more than they need, take a little more than, take as much of her vital energy as possible to maintain the fidelity of the transmission when they can. But sometimes it just blips happen in the communication. So in 17.15, Don says, I would like to make a point clear now that I am sure of myself. People of this planet, following any religion or no religion at all, or having no intellectual knowledge of the law of one or of anything at all, can still be harvested into the fourth density if they are of that vibration. Is this not correct? I am Ra. This is correct. However, you will find few who are harvestable whose radiance does not cause others to be aware of their, what you may call, spirituality, the quality of the mind-body-spirit complex distortion. Thus, it is not particularly probable that an entity would be completely unknown to his immediate acquaintances as an unusually radiant personality, even were this individual not caught up in any of the distortions of your so-called religious systems. So here Ra is affirming that you don't have to know any metaphysics or any philosophy to be harvestable. You just have to choose to be a good person. You just have to choose. I know sometimes people have problems with the ethics and the morality of service to others and service to self. I believe that the ethics and morality are inherent in the two paths. So here Ra is basically saying that as well, that somebody who's harvestable usually radiates a quality. And that quality is usually, the way we recognize it is we see them as a good and kind and generous and warm person. So this isn't even the question Don asks. Don asks specifically about what knowledge do people have to have. But here Ra is saying that even people who have no religious distortions at all can still have this quality of radiation, of warmth and compassion that is usually evident in a person who's harvestable. So I'm sure we've all known at least a few people in our lives who were like that, who were just unfailingly warm and radiant and generous with themselves and stood out because of that. And that is one tell that somebody is of harvestable vibration, is this radiance. So in 1716, Don asks, when Jesus of Nazareth incarnated, was there an attempt by the Orion group to discredit him in some way? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, can you tell me what the Orion group did in order to try to cause his downfall? I am Ra. We may describe in general what occurred. The technique was that of building upon other negatively oriented information. This information had been given by the one whom your peoples call Yahweh. This information involved many strictures upon behavior and promised power of the third density service to self nature. These two types of distortions were impressed upon those already oriented to think these thought forms. This eventually led to many challenges of the entity known as Jesus. It eventually led to one sound vibration complex, Judas, as you call this entity, who believed that it was doing the appropriate thing in bringing about or forcing upon the one you call Jesus the necessity for bringing in the third density planetary power distortion of third density rule over others. This entity, Judas, felt that, if pushed into a corner, the entity you call Jesus would then be able to see the wisdom of using the power of intelligent infinity in order to rule others. The one you call Judas was mistaken in this estimation of the reaction of the entity, Jesus, whose teach learning was not oriented towards this distortion. This resulted in the destruction of the bodily complex of the one known as Jesus to you. So here Ra is saying that essentially Judas was influenced by these very predominant negative thought forms that had been put into place by Yahweh and those believing in Yahweh's religion at that time. And Judas saw Jesus' power, again, going back to the last question where we were talking about how those who are harvestable have a quality of radiance about them. Judas recognized this power of intelligent infinity within Jesus and knew that if Jesus just tried to be a ruler and tried to take power and decree his beliefs, that he would be successful in doing that because he was a powerful being. But Jesus didn't want to use his power that way. Jesus didn't want to tell people what to believe from a position of authority. Jesus wanted to inspire people to recognize that quality within him that was a humbleness, a humility, a lack of power over others, but still then this radiance, right? This assuredness of his own self. So Judas tried to, as Ra says, back Jesus into a corner, and Jesus did not respond the way that Judas was anticipating him to respond. And this is what Ra says caused Jesus' downfall. And they said they can describe in general what occurred, and whether or not this story of Judas is the truth of what happened with Jesus, I don't know. I don't know if I believe that everything we know about Jesus' life is actual reality for what happened with Jesus. But Ra is willing to talk about this parable, essentially, the parable of Jesus, the parable of trying to force humble beings into power through violent methods, trying to force somebody through violence to do what you want them to do, what you think is best for them and best for others, even if it's infringing upon the free will of others. And so Jesus chose instead to be a martyr than be a king. So 1718, Don asks, then if the entity Jesus was fourth density, and there are wanderers on the planet today who come from fifth and sixth density, what was it that Jesus did that enabled him to be such a good healer, and could these fifth and sixth density beings here today do the same? I am Ra. Those who heal may be of any density which has the consciousness of spirit. This includes third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. The third density can be one in which healing takes place just as the others. However, there is more illusory material to understand, to balance, to accept, and to move forward from. The gate to intelligent infinity can only be opened when an understanding of the instreamings of intelligent energy are opened unto the healer. These are the so-called natural laws of your local space-time continuum and its web of electromagnetic sources or nexi of instreaming energy. Know then first the mind and the body. Then, as the spirit is integrated and synthesized, those are harmonized into a mind-body-spirit complex, which can move among the dimensions and which can open the gateway to intelligent infinity, thus healing self by light and sharing that light with others. True healing is simply the radiance of the self causing an environment in which a catalyst may occur, which initiates the recognition of self by self of the self-healing properties of the self. So, another pretty big chunky answer from Ra here. Ra's saying that, Jesus didn't have anything in particular because he was a fourth density wanderer. That wasn't necessarily what allowed him to heal. Anyone can heal. And it's just a matter of balancing your own energy body, balancing your mind and your body, so that you can integrate the spirit and work with intelligent infinity. And I think here too, they say that, in third density, there's more illusory material to understand, to balance, to accept, and to move forward from, and then talk again about the natural laws of our local space-time continuum and its web of electromagnetic sources or nexi of in-streaming energy. So when you're healing while incarnated in third density, you have to have an understanding of these natural laws of third density and how they work, how time works, how the body itself works, and the functions it has and can perform within the realm of what it can do. But once you understand, balance, accept, you can move forward from some of those illusory limitations that are part of fourth density. As Ross says at another point, when someone opens the gateway to intelligent infinity, from the outside, people might see what they would discern as miracles, because it's breaking what they recognize as the natural laws of our planet. But once you have access to intelligent infinity, which goes beyond the illusion, you're able to do a lot more within the illusion. But you have to go, it's one of those things, just like all of it, you have to go through it to get past it. You have to really learn and understand and accept the illusion. But then again, Ra also says that a healer is just, again, as we were talking about before, you can't enlighten somebody. You can't heal somebody. You can just give them the catalyst to do that for themselves. And that's really, free will, right? We're trying to do all of this without taking away anybody's free will. So a healer is just opening the door to intelligent infinity. And the person who wants to be healed can then see how to open that door for the self. And again, too, so much of what we're talking about is just like a vibration, right? If you keep carrying that vibration of oneness, of being healed, that can catalyze somebody else into that awareness, that recognition, and then they can find that gateway, that doorway to intelligent infinity within themselves. And then they can bring it in so that their body complex is less distorted through the complicated manifestations of in-streaming energy that come onto our planet. So in 1719, Dawn asks, how did Jesus learn this during his incarnation? I am Ra. This entity learned the ability by a natural kind of remembering at a very young age. Unfortunately, this entity first discovered his ability to penetrate intelligent infinity by becoming the distortion you call angry at a playmate. This entity was touched by the entity known as Jesus to you and was fatally wounded. Thus, the one known as Jesus became aware that there dwelt in him a terrible potential. This entity determined to discover how to use this energy for the good, not for the negative. This entity was extremely positively polarized and remembered more than most wanderers do. So, Jesus was able to penetrate the forgetting at a very young age via his supposed killing of a classmate, via an angry outburst. He realized then the power. He recognized the gateway to intelligent infinity and decided he was going to use that for good and not evil. And that is what then led him forward on the rest of his life. And then Ross says that he was extremely positively polarized and remembered more than most wanderers do. So he was able to really penetrate that forgetting at a level that most of us won't. That's how Jesus was able to do what Jesus did. So in 1720, Dawn asks, how did this aggressive action against a playmate affect Jesus in his spiritual growth? Where did he go after his physical death? I am Ra. The entity you called Jesus was galvanized by this experience and began a lifetime of seeking and searching. This entity studied first, day and night, in its own religious constructs, which you called Judaism, and was learned enough to be a rabbi, as you call the teach-learners of this particular rhythm or distortion of understanding, at a very young age. At the age of approximately 13 1/2 of your years, this entity left the dwelling place of its earthly family, as you would call it, and walked into many other places, seeking further information. This went on sporadically until the entity was approximately 25, at which time it returned to its family dwelling and learned and practiced the art of its earthly father. When the entity had become able to integrate or synthesize all experiences, the entity began to speak to other selves and to learn what it had felt during the preceding years to be of a worthwhile nature. The entity was absolved karmically of the destruction of another self when it was in its last portion of lifetime and spoke upon what you would call a cross, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." In forgiveness lies the stoppage of the wheel of action, or what you call karma. So here Don is asking, was Jesus able to return to fourth density because he killed somebody? He murdered somebody. And Ra says that the murder was a catalyst for his further seeking, and he learned and he sought, and he then was able to integrate and synthesize his experiences. And once he was able to do that, he went forward and taught others what he thought was important. And then when he was crucified on the cross, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And he was with murderers when he was crucified. So people have always taken that to be Jesus forgiving the murderers on the cross. But here Ra is saying that he was actually forgiving himself and realizing that what he did was in ignorance. It wasn't a deliberate choice to just take this other child's life from them. And again, in forgiveness lies the stoppage of the wheel of action, or what you call karma. And that's very important. This is something I wish Don maybe would have explored a little bit more, is forgiveness and karma and how these things work. But essentially, you have to forgive yourself to stop the wheel of karma. And you have to forgive others and what they've done to you, and you have to forgive yourself and what you've done to others. And then this stops that cycle of perpetuating unconscious catalyst and the same cycles over and over, because that's what happens in our lives, right? We get into these cycles of repeating the same catalyst until we realize what's happening. And then when we realize what's happening, then the correct response is forgiveness of the self, forgiveness of others. So in 1721, Don asks, "Then in which density does the entity known as Jesus now reside?" I am Ra. This information is harmless, though unimportant. This entity studies now the lessons of the wisdom vibration, the fifth density, also called the light vibration. So Jesus has harvested into fifth density. In 1722, Don says, "In our culture, there is a great saying that he will return. Can you tell me if this is planned?" I am Ra. We will attempt to sort out this question. It is difficult. This entity became aware that it was not an entity of itself, but operated as a messenger of the one creator whom this entity saw as love. This entity was aware that this cycle was in its last portion and spoke to the effect that those of its consciousness would return at the harvest. The particular mind-body-spirit you call Jesus is, as what you would call an entity, not to return except as a member of the Confederation, occasionally speaking through a channel. However, there are others of the identical congruency of consciousness that will welcome those to fourth density. This is the meaning of the returning. So essentially, like what a lot of Jesus said, it was a code. It wasn't that he specifically will return, but that other fourth density entities will return, who are going to also be full of love and wanting to teach and share the fourth density vibration. So I'm sure that includes fourth density wanderers and also the new breed of dual activated beings who have begun incarnating on our planet to try to help the harvest. So here Ross says, no, Jesus isn't coming back. Just people who are like Jesus who come from the fourth density. So in 1723, Don says, you spoke of the alleviation of karma being forgiveness. I'm having a hard time phrasing this question. I think I'll have to come back to it. So here Don's trying to ask more about forgiveness and karma, but struggles and decides to go on. I'll ask this other question. Can you tell me why the Earth will be fourth density positive instead of fourth density negative after the cycle is complete, since it seems that there is a greater negative population? I am Ra. The Earth seems to be negative. That is due to the quiet, shall we say, horror, which is the common distortion which those good or positively oriented entities have towards the occurrences which are of your space-time present. However, Those oriented and harvestable in the ways of service to others greatly outnumber those whose orientation towards service to self has become that of harvestable quality. So, I've mentioned this before. That's why we're going to be fourth density positive. We just have more harvestable positive beings. I think the comments about the quiet horror are interesting. I think about that a lot. When I read this yesterday, and I was thinking about this question, and it made me think of this response from Ra, really, and it made me think about how it really is apparent that more people want to choose goodness than want to choose evil. Okay, and I'm saying good and evil. Ra says good in this response. The quiet horror, which is the common distortion which those good or positively oriented entities have towards the occurrences which are of your space-time present. So here Ra is equating goodness with positively oriented polarity. So more people are choosing good. More people want to see others thrive, to see others happy and at peace, than there are people who just want to tear others down. And, I bring up, you can look at social media, and on a whole, you can see that. Like, if you look at it objectively, you can see that. But this quiet horror causes us to fixate on the negative. And that's what I think, is that we get kind of biased. It's like when you post something on the internet and you get a lot of happy feedback, a lot of positive comments, a lot of kind people, that can all blend together. And you get one negative comment, one unkind thing is said, and that can just roll in your brain forever. You'll just go over and over this one bad comment and focus on that instead of remembering all of the good comments that outweigh the bad comments. So I think that's one of the symptoms of our quiet horror, is just internalizing the negative a lot more than we internalize the positive. And also, we've kind of been conditioned a lot as a social memory complex to not speak up against those who are saying mean things, being cruel. It takes a huge act of will, actually, to stand up for others against somebody who's trying to tear them down. And so, for these reasons, I think that's why we are biased towards seeing our social complex as more negative than positive. But I do think that when you look at it objectively, when you look at, when you're walking down the street and you're just waving to your neighbors or smiling at people at the grocery store, most people are going to respond with kindness and warmth. Far more are going to respond with kindness and warmth than just spitting on you for acknowledging them with that kindness and warmth, right? So just something to try to put in the forefront of your brain for when you think of how negative things appear, and just remember that that is a skewed perception. So 1724, then Dawn follows up and asks, in other words, there will be fewer negative entities being harvested into fourth density than there will be positive. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. The great majority of your peoples will repeat third density. Again, we have most people are unpolarized, and that makes it so that they go back and forth a lot. But there are more who are polarized positively than negatively, which means that there are more people too who are biased towards positive polarization, even if they aren't harvestable yet, than there are people biased towards negative. So 1725, Dawn asks, how did Taurus Bulba, Genghis Khan, and Rasputin get harvested prior to the harvest? I am Ra. It is the right/privilege/duty of those consciously opening the gate to intelligent infinity to choose the manner of their leaving of the density. Those of negative orientation who so achieve this right/duty most often choose to move forward in their learned teaching of service to self. So, if you penetrate the gateway to intelligent infinity in a polarized way, because Ross says too that there are some people who have a random hole in their aura. But if you polarize and you open the gateway to intelligent infinity through your polarity, you get to choose when you move forward into fourth density. Most positive beings choose to stay because they understand, they see all of the others who are still needing to make harvest. So they choose to come back and try to teach and heal and share. But service to self beings want to gain more power. Incarnating again as a veiled human is not the best way to gain power. Again, it's one of those things. It's like how if Orion were to land on the Earth, they would in the short term lose power, and it'd be a gamble, and then maybe they'd have more power at the end of it. But it's a gamble, and they're not willing to take that risk. They're going to take the most straightforward, easy path, even if it's slower, to gaining more power, because that's better than losing power again. And again, when you incarnate, even if you've penetrated the gateway to intelligent infinity, if you incarnate again while you're veiled, you might get swept back up into the maelstrom again. You might accumulate karma and need to do another cycle. And negative beings aren't going to risk that. Positive beings will risk that, but negative beings won't. So, in 17.26, Dawn asks, is this the reason for what we call spontaneous combustion? I am Ra. This is not correct. So, no. 17.27, Dawn asks, can you tell me what causes that phenomenon? I am Ra. Picture, if you will, a forest. One tree is struck by lightning. It burns. Lightning does not strike elsewhere. Elsewhere does not burn. There are random occurrences which do not have to do with the entity, but with the window phenomenon of which we spoke. So here I was saying that spontaneous combustion is essentially a totally random thing. As it doesn't have anything to do with polarity or someone harvesting themselves. And that's an interesting question. Yeah, it'd be like going back through history and finding out people who spontaneously combusted and then being able to be like, oh yes, they were a negative entity. Like, no, interesting thought, but it is just completely random. So that's the follow-up here then. 17.28, Dawn asks, are these particular entities all uniquely the same, or are they just random entities? I am Ra. The latter is correct. So there's our bit about spontaneous combustion. It is random. Moving on to the next one, 17.29, Dawn asks, am I to understand that the harvest will occur in the year 2011, or will it be spread? I am Ra. This is an approximation. We have stated we have difficulty with your time-space. This is an appropriate, probable, possible time-space nexus for harvest. Those who are not in incarnation at this time will be included in the harvest. So, again, Ra has difficulty with our time, and again, this is a possibility, probability vortex that the harvest occurred in 2011, but it seems unlikely to me that anyone who polarizes after 2011 wouldn't be included in the harvest. I don't know. Maybe that's my own bias. I didn't find the raw material till 2013. I don't know if I would have been considered harvestable back before I found the raw material or not. I was biased towards service to others. Do I think of myself as harvestable now? I don't know. I guess I would think so. Just because I have a love of my incarnation, a love for peoples, a love for the planet, a love for what we're doing here, even in the hard times. So I don't know. Again, my bias says that 2011 wasn't the cutoff point necessarily. But again, here Ra is saying that they have trouble with our time space, and this is a potential possibility vortex for the harvest. But I don't think we have that answer for sure when the cutoff point was. But yeah, anyway, I hope I'm harvestable. I try. I want to be. I want to serve others. I want to surrender to the Creator. I want to accelerate my consciousness and understanding beyond the level of fourth density harvestability. But I'm not going to just give up and say, oh, I'm harvestable, so I'm good. I don't have to do any more work. Like, that's not even it at all. Like, I want to go beyond that. I want to keep going. It's not just about crossing that threshold into being harvestable. And if I'm not, if I have to go to the next planet and start another master cycle over, that doesn't give me anxiety. That doesn't make me feel worried or overwhelmed at that possibility either. I would be fine if I had to repeat third density and do this all over again. I'm fine with that. So those are my opinions on that. And now we will move on to 17.30. Dawn asks, well, if an entity wants to learn the ways of it, wants to be of service to others rather than service to self while he is in this third density, are there best ways of being service to others, or is any way just as good as any other way? I am Ra. The best way to be of service to others has been explicitly covered in previous material. We will iterate briefly. The best way of service to others is the constant attempt to seek to share the love of the Creator as it is known to the inner self. This involves self-knowledge and the ability to open the self to the other self without hesitation. This involves, shall we say, radiating that which is the essence or the heart of the mind-body-spirit complex. Speaking to the intention of your question, the best way for each seeker in third density to be of service to others is unique to that mind-body-spirit complex. This means that the mind-body-spirit complex must then seek within itself the intelligence of its own discernment as to the way it may best serve other selves. This will be different for each. There is no best, there is no generalization, nothing is known. So, really here, Ra's saying that we all have to find our own way. That's how we manifest the infinity of the Creator, is by finding unique ways to serve others. And so, obviously, you see a portion of my service. I used my own discernment to realize that I, for whatever reason, read what Ra says and don't struggle to understand it like a lot of people do, like most people probably do. And so I've always tried to lean into that and to be in spaces where people are asking questions about, what does Ra mean about this? What does Ra say about that? And trying to answer those questions and trying to help people understand these very specific books. It's such a niche thing, right? It's not something that I can just like ride my high horse on, being like, I understand the law of one. Like, I don't understand the law of one. I can read what Ra says and articulate it in a way that might give more understanding to others who read what Ra says and don't feel the same clarity of the communication that I do. That's really what I feel like my primary service is. These books, I think, have gone a lot further into the consciousness than Ra maybe even ever anticipated. As we read just a little bit ago, they would have been happy if only 3, being the group, or 4 or 5, 2 of their friends, had read this material and came to some sort of fourth density awareness or understanding from access to their teachings. And now, it's really a part of our collective consciousness. Not a huge part, still a niche part, but anyone can find it at this point, especially if you're into aliens or UFOs or anything like that. Like, it will come across your path if you're in those types of communities. So I think a lot of people have been exposed to this material that maybe weren't even necessarily ready to integrate it. Because as Ross says, like, you should be dispassionate about sharing this material, but there are a lot of people who are very passionate about trying to get people to read the Law of One because it's blown their mind and they want other people to have their mind blown in the same way. But not everybody's mind gets blown in the same way. Sometimes people's minds get blown in a way that becomes destructive to their psyche. When we talk later about Aleister Crowley, Ross says that he became overstimulated with the true nature of things, and that ultimately caused a great imbalance in him. Even though he was positive, he wasn't able to really integrate all of the things he learned. And so that's one of the big things that concerns me, is that there are people who get access to these books and it completely ungrounds them, and it completely overwhelms them with the true nature of reality. So to the people who have told me that this podcast in and of itself is grounding, like, that's honestly the best compliment that I could get, is that this is grounding the material instead of making you feel more and more ungrounded, because that is just a very, very slippery slope. And this is such dense, potent information. These books are so highly magical, and the way Ra phrases things and uses our language is just overwhelming, right? It's very overwhelming. And I think you have to be perfectly ready to integrate this. Otherwise, it can cause problems. So that's where I have found my service, as you can all see and hear. I've chosen this. I've chosen to try to be a part of the Law of One community and to try to teach this material with as few distortions that cause the type of ungrounding that can be destabilizing to somebody's human incarnation. And again, I'm not doing that so that I can be like a Law of One guru or to be recognized as somebody who has this knowledge. I really genuinely just want to help people. I really have seen so many people slip away after finding these books. And that's heartbreaking. I've had close friends, people that I really cared about, just lose their grip on reality and struggle again to find it in a way that they can remain useful in their incarnations, feel stable, feel like they have a grip on anything. So again, that's just how I've used my discernment to see what my quote-unquote gifts are. Again, it's so niche, it's hard to like have any sort of ego about it. It's just kind of like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to do. Talking about the Law of One makes me feel as alive as about anything. Like I've said many times, doing this feels so great to me. I love doing this. I love just reading what Ra has said and then contextualizing it, interpreting it, sharing it. I love it. So I'm happy to serve in this way. And thank you all for accepting my service, finding it useful, and reinforcing then that feedback loop of my own discernment that, okay, this is a good service. This is what I should be spending my time doing. It is helping people. So thank you again to all of you who have helped with that. So in 13.31, Dawn says, thank you very much. I don't wish to take up extra time by asking questions over again. Some are so important, I try to ask similar questions in different ways to expand on the answer. Seems to be inaudible. What we're getting at, maybe not. In the book OWASP, it states that if an individual is more than 50% for others, that is, goes over the 50% service to others and is less than 50% service to self, then he is harvestable. Is this a correct statement? I am Ra. This is correct if the harvesting is to be for the positive fourth dimensional level. So the number 51% service to others is from OWASP. At least that's where Dawn originally saw it. And Ra did say that OWASP came from a Confederation member, and Ra is affirming that that is really the threshold in third density to harvest into fourth density positive. So 17.32, Dawn asks, what must be the entity's percentage, shall we say, if he is to be harvested for the negative? I am Ra. The entity who wishes to pursue the path of service to self must attain a grade of 5, that is, 5% service to others, 95% service to self. It must approach totality. The negative path is quite difficult to attain harvestability upon and requires great dedication. So, here are the numbers. 95% service to self to be service to self, 51% service to others to be service to others. And the negative path, you really have to be focused on serving the self. Like, really, really. And so Dawn asks, why is the negative path so much more difficult a path to attain harvestability upon than the positive? I am Ra. This is due to a distortion of the Law of One, which indicates that the gateway to intelligent infinity be a gateway at the end of a straight and narrow path, as you may call it. To attain 51% dedication to the welfare of other selves is as difficult as attaining a grade of 5% dedication to other selves. The, shall we say, sinkhole of indifference is between those two. So, Dawn, this question and response is a little confusing because Dawn asks, why is the service to self path more difficult? And Ra's response is that they're both equally difficult, actually. That the percentages are really more, I think, on different planets where they aren't, the social memory complex isn't so negative, that those numbers might move a little bit more because this is just where those numbers fall to make it an equal difficulty. And there are co-channelings that say that the default in our social memory complex is about 20 to 25% service to others. So we're all starting about there. And so it's about the same distance then to 5% service to others, and 50% service to others. That one has to gain in their polarity. And so we also have the gateway to intelligent infinity be a gateway at the end of a straight and narrow path. And the straight and narrow path, it isn't straight like a straight line. It's straight like a body of water in a narrow passageway. The straight and narrow means that you have a very small potential for deviation to get there. So essentially, the further you polarize in either direction, the less choices you have, ironically, to what direction then you're going to go if you're going to keep polarizing. You always have free will. You can always go backwards. But when you're going forwards, those choices get narrower and narrower and narrower. And that's a part of polarity. And they get further and further away from each other. The two paths do. So in 1734, Don asks, well, then if an entity is harvested into fourth density with a grade, let's say a 51% service to others, 49% for self, what level of the fourth density would he go into? I am assuming that there are different levels of the fourth density. I am Ra, this is correct. Each enters the subdensity which vibrates in accordance with the entity's understanding. So again, we have infinite subdensities of each density, and when you're harvested, your mind, body, spirit totality, your guides, your higher self, all of these things work together to figure out where the best sub-density is for you to continue your learning. And so someone who has just crossed over into the threshold, they're obviously going to be in the lower sub-densities of the fourth density. And in 1735, Don says, how many levels do we have here in the third density at this time? I am Ra. The third density has an infinite number of levels. So there's, again, an infinite potential of experience in our third density. In 17.36, Don asks, I've heard that there are 7 astral and 7 devaconic primary levels. Is this correct? I am Ra. You speak of some of the more large distinctions in levels in your inner planes. That is correct. So then in a follow-up, Don asks, well, who inhabit the astral and who inhabit the devaconic planes? I am Ra. Entities inhabit the various planes due to their vibrational nature. The astral plane varies from thought forms in the lower extremities to enlightened beings who become dedicated to teach learning in the higher astral planes. In the devaconic planes, as you call them, are those whose vibrations are even more close to the primal distortions of love light. Beyond these planes, there are others. So I think in general, and this is what the footnotes say too, that devaconic is essentially congruent with the fifth density, or the fifth level of subdensities, and astral is fourth density. So Don is saying that he has heard before that there are 7 levels of the astral plane, 7 levels of the devaconic planes, and that is the larger distinctions. In those 7 levels, then there are another 7 levels in each, another 7 levels in each of those 7 levels, all the way down forever. And so in 1738, Don says, well, this is difficult. Our physical planes. Are there 7 subplanes to what we call our physical plane here? I am Ra. You are correct. This is difficult to understand. There are an infinite number of planes. In your particular space-time continuum distortion, there are 7 subplanes of mind-body-spirit complexes. You will discover the vibrational nature of these 7 planes as you pass through your experiential distortions, meeting other selves of the various levels which correspond to the energy influx centers of the physical vehicle. The invisible or inner third density planes are inhabited by those who are not of body complex natures such as yours. That is, they do not collect about their spirit-mind complexes a chemical body. Nevertheless, these entities are divided in what you may call an artificial dream within a dream into various levels. In the upper levels, desire to communicate knowledge back down to the outer planes of existence becomes less due to the intensive learn/teaching which occurs upon these levels. So Hira is saying that as you move through your experiential distortions, you'll meet other selves in similar subdensity to you, because you're going to be existing in subdensities with people of a similar vibrational makeup, and that the inner planes are inhabited by those who are not incarnated in bodies. They are spirit/mind complexes, Ra calls them, and They do try to interact with us and teach us and communicate with us, but the more advanced that they get, the less likely they are to try to integrate and teach us. And so in 1739, Don asks, then is it necessary to penetrate one plane at a time as we move from what we call third density physical through these planes? I am Ra. It has been our experience that some penetrate several planes at one time. Others penetrate them slowly. Some, in eagerness, attempt to penetrate the higher planes before penetrating the energies of the so-called lower or more fundamental planes. This causes energy imbalance. You will find ill health, as you cause this distortion, to frequently be the result of a subtle mismatch of energies in which some of the higher energy levels are being activated by the conscious attempts of the entity, while the entity has not penetrated the lower energy centers or subdensities of this density. So, a very important point by Ra. I've talked about it before, and again, I was just talking about it. Some people try to consciously penetrate the higher planes, the higher chakras, higher awareness, before they've properly balanced their lower chakras. And this causes ill health and other energy imbalances in the entity. And of course, this can be healed and corrected in a lot of ways, but sometimes people just don't know how to do that. They don't understand the necessary work that must be done in the lower or more fundamental planes. And so that's why it's really important to start with your red ray and work your way up through your energy body. Don't neglect those lower chakras. Even if it feels like they're mostly working and you do have access to your higher chakras and you aren't in a state of psychosis or ill health, it's still important to maintain that. It's kind of like you have to do that kind of hygiene. Like meditation is a type of spiritual hygiene. Working on clearing out your chakras, especially your lower ones, is also a type of spiritual hygiene. You just have to check in with that part of your energy body and not be afraid of that, not be afraid of those lower physical energy centers, and not be so distracted or place a greater importance on the higher energy centers and the mystical potential of those higher energy centers, because ultimately the mystical potential can overwhelm you and cause damage to your overall form and function if you don't pay attention to the lower rays. So it's very easy. Like I said, it's very easy when you read these books to just become so excited to work with intelligent infinity, to grasp it, to work on wisdom, even to work on the heart. But you really need to understand those lower chakras before you can really get any energy into the higher chakras in a safe and useful way. Yeah, so I think the point about ill health is super, super important. If you are experiencing these kinds of distortions of the body, the physical body, then go into those lower chakras. Spend a lot of time in those lower chakras, more than searching out metaphysical truths, more than trying to connect with intelligent infinity. Just really try to understand and integrate that level of the teachings, the red ray, the orange ray, the yellow ray. They're so important, and most of our health problems are coming from somewhere in there. So in 1740, Don asks, is there a best way to meditate? I am Ra. No. There's no best way to meditate. Just sit in the silence without any expectation. Just try to, Ra does say the mind must be opened like a door. The key is silence. I think silence is the most important facet of meditation, trying to cut down on our sensory reception from the outer world, going in within ourselves. But other than that, there isn't a special breathing technique that's going to help you get enlightened. There isn't mantras that you can say. Again, this is another way that the creator has to discover itself and to express itself and to find its own unique experience. So in 1741, Don asks, at this time, near the end of the cycle, how are reincarnations into the physical allocated, shall I say, on this planet? In our own... The rest of the question is inaudible. I am Ra. Entities wishing to obtain critically needed experience in order to become harvestable are incarnated with priority over those who will, without too much probable/possible doubt, need to re-experience this density. And I'll just read the next couple questions. We're about done here. but these ones all have the same topic. 1742, Dawn asks, how long has this been going on, this type of allocation? I am Ra. This has been going on since the first individual entity became conscious of its need to learn the lessons of this density. This was the beginning of what you may call a seniority by vibration. Questioner, can you explain what you mean by a seniority by vibration? I am Ra. This will be the final question of this session of working. The seniority by vibration is the preferential treatment, shall we say, which follows the ways of the law of one, which encourages harvestable individuals, each individual becoming aware of the time of harvest and the need on a self-level to bend mind, body, and spirit towards the learned teaching of these lessons, is given priority in order that this entity may have the best possible chance, shall we say, of succeeding in this attempt. May we ask at this time if there are any questions? So, essentially, all of their density is built around trying to harvest people into fourth density along one of the paths. And so as soon, towards the beginning of the cycle, at some point, entities start becoming aware of this need to polarize. And those who become aware of the need to polarize then get preferential treatment into the incarnational nexus. They get to be first in line. And then those who are not yet conscious fall to the bottom of the line. And then as the planetary population increases, there are more opportunities for everybody. But essentially, first in line are those who are closest to being harvested. And this then creates more potential for harvest because those who are incarnating are more likely to have a bias versus those who have not yet made any sort of choice, created any sort of bias in their being, and are just still behaving in a pretty unconscious, animalistic, instinctual type of way. So here at the end of harvest, everybody incarnated right now has the opportunity, is close, versus, again, what Ross says that, those without too much probable/possible doubt will need to re-experience this density. They're at the bottom of the line. But since we're at the end of the cycle, so many third density beings have cultivated their choice. They just haven't made it in a way that pushes them over the threshold. And again, the more polarity that beings have, even if they aren't polarized towards harvestability, the more potential for polarized experience then comes from that. Whereas again, if everyone's just kind of behaving in an unconscious, instinctual way without recognition of the choice needing to be made, then there isn't as many opportunities to make that choice because nobody has that kind of awareness to share with others. So in 1744, Dawn asks, my only question is, there anything we can do to make the instrument, it's inaudible, but, I'm sure we can assume he said more comfortable. I am Ra. This instrument is not wearing the appropriate apparel for this work. As imporings occur in the regions of the, what you may call, seventh chakra, as you speak of these energy centers, filtering through the sixth and so forth, the entity's other or base chakras become somewhat de-energized. Thus, this entity should be more careful in its selection of warm apparel for the part of the body complex you call the feet. May we answer any other brief questions? Questioner. We want to put heavier clothing on the feet. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. I will leave this instrument now. I leave you in the love and the light of the one infinite creator, Adonai. So, the last session, Carla was fine. There were no notes. This session, Ra's saying her feet need to be warmer. And it's funny because I actually had a series of dreams a couple weeks ago, basically telling me that I need to wear socks now that it's wintertime, and that's such a weird thing. And I'm just a little bit autistic, and socks are kind of just the worst thing in the world for me. So I'm struggling with that myself. Full disclosure. Gotta wear socks. It helps so that keeps the base chakras more energized, apparently. So it's a good reminder. Gotta wear the socks instead of walking around on my bare floors. And, Carla had problems with this later on when they move into a house in the future. They are in a unwinterized cabin on a lake, And during the winter, Carla actually started to get frostbite on her toes from walking around on the cold hardwood floors because her circulation in her feet was so poor. So I don't think I'm at risk of getting frostbite, but I do have laminate floors that have been getting kind of cold. At least in the mornings, they're pretty cold. So if you got cold feet, wear your socks. Probably good advice. Anyway, we made it through session 17, and I think a pretty good session with lots of really good stuff to talk about. And so I really thank everybody for listening to me talk about it and being interested in what Ra has to say. And yeah, just full of gratitude, grateful for all of you, grateful for our creator, grateful for these experiences, grateful for being able to learn, teach this really cool philosophy, and to have a great teacher like Ra to learn from. And again, hopefully this one doesn't take as long to edit and put out. It did end up being almost 2 hours as well to edit down. So we will see. Hopefully it doesn't take 2 weeks. I really would like to keep moving along on this journey because, like I said, I really like doing this. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. So I will see you all next time with session 18.